Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our session on Pipeline to Success, Pathways and Career Growth in Media and Entertainment. I'm very excited for today's panel, and I hope you are as well. Now, before we start our main event, I want to let you know about our next events in the month of November. So both events will focus on VFX, animation, and game pipeline modernization. On Tuesday, November 12th, we'll have a session on the use of Kubernetes in modern pipelines. And then on that same week, just 2 days later, on Thursday, November 14th, we'll have another session on pipeline modernization on introducing Terraform for automated management and provision of pipeline infrastructure anywhere on the globe. So we hope you'll join us for those sessions as well. As for today's event, we'll be putting it on our YouTube channel in a few days. If you search in YouTube for the Pipeline Conference, you should be able to find our channel to find the recording as well as all of our past events there as well. Now, on to our main event. Our moderator will be asking various questions to our panel to get their thoughts and insight. And as they're discussing, please feel free to submit additional questions you may have through the Zoom Q&A tool. Members of our team will collect those as well as anything mentioned in the chat for our moderators and panelists to address at the end. So, with that, please join me in welcoming our moderator for today, Rachel Rose. Rachel Rose, the Director of Research and Development at Industrial Light and Magic, drives technology that aids artists in the creation of feature films, episodic series, and interactive media. In her 17 years at ILM, Rachel has worked on a wide range of films, series, and interactive projects, including Rango, Noah, Strange Magic, personal favorite Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2, and The Mandalorian, specifically driving forward the groundbreaking ILM Stagecraft LED technology used on the show. Rachel is an active member of the VFX branch of the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, and she also participates in the Academy's Science and Technology Council, the VFX Branch Executive Committee, and the Scientific and Technical Awards Main Committee. Her work on ILM's Block Party, a visual procedural rigging system, earned her an Academy Award for Technical Achievement in 2018. Rachel is also a member of the Visual Effects Society and the TV Academy, where she serves as a member of the Executive Committee for Science and Technology Peer Group. Rachel is also a strong advocate for women in technology and the film industry, participating in DEI efforts throughout the industry, including as co-chair for the Diversity and Inclusion Working Group of the Academy Software Foundation. Please welcome Rachel Rose.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction, Jason. Now, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this month's Pipeline Conference session on career growth in media and entertainment. So career growth is something that can be hard to define, partially because it can come in many forms. Learning a new skill, an increase in job responsibilities, advancements in seniority, or even taking on a management or leadership role. So that's what we are going to dive in today. I'm thrilled to be joined by a great group of panelists who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to from media and entertainment. And today's panel is going to share a variety of perspectives on how to grow in our industry. And we hope that you were able to take some ideas that can meet you where you are in your career. Now, as Jason said, we're going to be covering a variety of topics and then open it up for a Q&A. Now, as the panelists share their thoughts, you can go ahead and submit questions using the Zoom Q&A tool that's at the bottom of your screen. And the Pipeline Conference team is going to collect those so that we can address them at the end. So let's go ahead and get started by introducing our panelists. So first up, we have Leila Fouqué. After starting as an IT consultant at the beginning of her career, Leila transitioned into the VFX and animation industry 15 years ago by first going through a computer graphics PhD and then joining a studio as a software developer. She is now the head of pipeline at Squeeze Animation.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone.
Awesome. Next, we have Tram Lee Jones. After getting a job on the Matrix Revolutions via Craigslist, no, really, Craigslist. Tram worked in VFX productions for film, TV, and commercials, moving from West to East Coast and back again along the way. Having served on the front lines of VFX, Tram has taken her expertise into project management software for media and entertainment, starting with Autodesk's ShotGrid and currently at Backlight as their VP for Creative Solutions.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here.
We're also joined by Kristine Middlemiss. With over 20 years of experience, Kristine is a seasoned leader in software development and innovation. Having worked at top companies across the software, gaming, film, and VFX industries, she specializes in Python, C++, motion capture and animation pipelines, and emerging technologies like AR and VR and AI. She holds an honors Bachelor of Computing from the University of Guelph and has contributed to projects such as Grand Theft Auto 5, Kung Fu Panda 3, and WandaVision.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm also glad to be here.
And then lastly, we have Fran Zandanella Benjamin. So Fran is the founder of the Pipeline Conference and the Senior Pipeline Technical Director at Planoptic Cognition. She loves helping artists and producers solve their creative challenges through technology. With more than 15 years in the VFX and animation industries, she has worked on a variety of studio pipelines covering animation, film for VFX for film, TV, streaming, commercials, and immersive projects.
Thank you, Rachel. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So now on to our first question. Let's just go ahead and get started. So for people just starting out, what resources or networks would you recommend so that people can enter into pipeline roles? Let's start with you, Fran.
So I feel that one of the strongest ways that you can get involved with various places before you get started is by volunteering. I actually did this in my career. I was in software, but I wanted to break into computer graphics. So I joined the Silicon Valley SIGGRAPH. And by arranging meetings with all of my heroes, I got to invite them to come and speak. And I got to meet, just the top people, people like Ed Catmull. And then I could ask them their advice for my career. And that helped me a lot. Also, I learned a lot from the people I was running these meetings with. Everything I've learned about producing, for example, I learned so much from Joan Collins, who's the chair of LA SIGGRAPH. So SIGGRAPH's a good way. VES, if you have enough, to get into the VES. Even if you don't, I actually started volunteering at the VES before I ever became a member. The Pipeline Conference, obviously, we put on events. We talk to a lot of pipeline people. It gives you a reason to chat with people and something to say to them. So, it's a way for people to get to know you. And I'll just hand that over to the next person who wants to answer.
Those are some great thoughts. I love the idea of volunteering. It's such a great way to connect with people. Anyone else have any thoughts on that one? Yeah, Tram.
I can add. So I think there's obviously networking in terms of, all the different events you can go to and the different organizations that are out there. There's a ton of stuff going on in that area, but also if you're already inside a facility and you're not yet in a pipeline role, I mean, there's always somebody there that you can talk to. It's as simple as, maybe saying, hey, if there is an opportunity, hey, can I grab a few minutes with you? Or, I'd love to learn how you, what got you interested. And hearing other people's journeys, asking them what interests them, what made them, switch. I know that when I was speaking to my Craigslist days of getting my first job, my first internship, that's kind of exactly what I did is, I started asking people, how did you get interested in what you were doing? And I mean, this is quite a while ago, but it was really helpful to understand that sometimes it wasn't even as straightforward as like, hey, I liked coding. It was like, I liked problem solving. I liked being able to see, everything get put together, because I think that's also the value of pipeline, right? You get to be exposed to so many different areas. At least like for me, my personality, I got like my hands on a lot of different cookie jars. And I think it's a great place to be able to get that exposure and be able to see all those things happening and also support it along the way. So yeah, I mean, I think just opening up the conversation really can help get people, get your creativity going in terms of like, is that for me? And I said creativity also on purpose because I think that even though we talk about pipeline, there is a creative aspect about it. It's that problem solving. You're still being creative, maybe just in a different way, not necessarily the pixels on screen, but getting those pixels created.
That's excellent. I mean, I feel like one of the things you mentioned there was kind of switching careers and your jump into this through Craigslist. I think that also comes to another question, which is, often once you're in the film industry and within what we do in film and animation, you might want to find other ways to continue to advance your career. So how can folks leverage a horizontal move to advance their skills and career when promotions aren't necessarily available? Leila, do you have an answer for that one?
Yeah, I'd first like to emphasize something you mentioned at the beginning, that growing and evolving in our career is not necessarily always in the leadership role, because that's what we think of at first. But there's actually a lot of things that we can work on. And so for me, it's more about identifying first what we like to do and what skills we particularly want to work on as well. Like if we feel that, okay, we're very good at programming, for example, but we'd like to see what it means to be an artist and to work with the pipeline, then look at, okay, is there any role that I could use my knowledge and my understanding of the pipeline in a more creative way, and other departments around me. So it's more, in my mind, it's more about thinking about ourselves and what we like to do, what we want to continue doing, which is not necessarily managing other people. There's a lot of different ways. And by that, like, make connection with other type of roles in the studio we are at, for example. And then talking with people like our manager or the department, and just understand what it means to work in a different role, and yeah, try it. I think I found that most times being curious and asking questions goes a long way, and that every time I was a bit nervous asking questions, and I'm like, oh, maybe I'll sound a bit stupid by asking that. Actually, it was super well received, and the person I was talking to was really happy to explain what they're doing, how they're doing it, etc. And so that's really the key for me, like just being curious and stay open-minded, and yeah, just explore other things. And maybe it won't work out, and maybe we're not gonna like it, but that's fine. Like, at least we've learned something about ourselves, that, okay, that's not something I want to do. Okay, let's try something else maybe. That's my foot on that.
I love that. Go ahead.
As to extend on what Leila just said too, I also really love that, it's like, yeah, try it. And if it doesn't work out, it's like, well, you know what, you just learned something. That's something that you didn't like to do. And that's okay. And I think we also need to think about things in the sense that when you try, it doesn't mean you have to, make it all the way. There's a lot of learning lessons. And it kind of goes back to the, what does success mean for you? And what does advancing your career mean for you? And I think when you start thinking about advancing your career, there's a lot of prep work you have to do, whether or not it's a horizontal move or a lateral, or climbing up a ladder. And again, that each person, you kind of have to figure out what's the right move for you. And in that preparation, it is one part talking to people, and like I said, seeing how others did it, but also discovering the things that really resonate with you. Try things that even if you think maybe you wouldn't like it, try it, and then you can know for certain. And especially I think right now when you're trying to advance your skill, like you can dive deeper into the current topic that you already know. I think there's so much information out there these days that it's almost endless, right? If anything, I think all of us probably even suffer from over information. So really just trying to stay focused on taking in those bits.
I always say it's like drinking from a fire hose. There's just way too much.
Yeah, I'd like to say, particularly if you're coming from the artist side, you may feel you don't know all this programming things, and of course with AI, maybe you don't need to know it. But I would say if you're in a department as an artist, look around and see what tools you need, and see if you can make something. It doesn't need to be something big or complicated. Pick something small and simple that'll just make your life easier, and see will it make the person next to you their life easier, and build from that. Um, it's pretty easy these days if you're on the artist side to pick up a little bit of programming and try it out. And when you do that, maybe also let your pipeline people know that you're trying it out, and you might have questions for them. That gives you a good reason to talk to them, but also it means that if you mess things up, they won't get super mad at you because they knew that you were doing it and they knew that you needed help. And as long as you're open with them and have communication, they're going to probably be more positive about that than saying, oh yeah, I just deleted everything from the database. That's why starting small is best. Build those wins.
Awesome. You're talking a lot about developing skills. So, Tram, what are some examples of some soft and hard skills that you think people can improve when looking for career advancement?
Yeah, so I really love calling out the soft skills because I think that sometimes we don't talk about that part of it enough. So I'm kind of start there, and I think some things that are really important to think about is your obviously communication skills, reading a room, being able to hear what people's needs are, because if you're looking at going into some kind of like pipeline role, you're building something for a group of people, and sometimes people can either get excited about what they're looking for, and sometimes you have to like read in between the lines a little bit. You also have to sometimes like take a step back, right, and think about what are they actually trying to solve, because oftentimes you come and say, okay, well, somebody will come to you maybe like as a pipeline TD. Someone will come to you and say, hey, I need this tool built, and you might say, okay, but what are you actually doing with it, and what problem does the current tool set not solve for you? And sometimes people aren't necessarily as forthcoming about that. And it's also knowing how to ask the question to get the response, not necessarily the response you want, but the response you need. We work in such a passionate industry that sometimes asking questions can elicit responses that potentially feel personal. So, there's, and we all work on deadlines, so we know that can happen, and it's being able to speak more to that. And then, I touched on the communicating thing. It's also just communicating doesn't necessarily mean you have to be dry or, for lack of better words, like corporate sounding. It just means you have to be able to clearly say, hey, this is what I think I understand you're saying. But also balance that with like the empathetic part, because you want people to know that you understand, because ultimately you're building tools to help people. And I think some of those skills are things that we often forget are also really important when it comes to building out tool sets. And I mean, with hard skills, I feel like hard skills, you keep learning that. You continually learn that. I mean, I think.
And it changes.
Yeah, and it changes. You have to stay on top of it, right?
Yeah.
And it depends, I think, too, like what areas are you looking to build pipeline tools in? So on my team in particular, I primarily am looking for people that are strong in Python, for Python and JavaScript on my team. Are the type of pipeline TPs. And I look for somebody who potentially has done some work with some glue tools, right? Tools that connect, one software program to another. And actually, we were just talking about it. Kubernetes is another thing that we look for. So it really depends on the roles that you're interested in and what areas you feel like you want to make an impact.
I feel that people need to decide, you need to think about, are you a breadth person or a depth person? And you don't have to stay in one and be that for your entire career. Not at all. For me, I'm more of a breadth person, and that's a little bit unusual. So I'll know things from everything from when something comes into the studio until it goes out of the studio, which in the old days used to be scanning coming in and filming going out, or conception, animatics to film out, whether it's digital or actually practically on film. And that's a little bit unusual. Also, I know something about editorial because I had a friend who was working as an assistant in editorial, and I used to hang out waiting for her. So then I'd start chatting up the editorial guys. They use software, right? My background is in computers. It's in computer engineering. And but just because you start from a tech side doesn't mean that you can't learn all the other things. And just because you start from an art side doesn't mean you can't learn the tech. So I know some people, they focus all their time on animation, and some people focus all their time in lighting. What's important when you're looking, particularly in an environment like now, is look for what type of pipeline people are being needed right now. So knowing something about AI is key. If you know what's out there for AI and have some ideas about how you could use that in your studio, and you've tried some things, that's ahead of a lot of other people. So it's that sort of thing that you need to just keep learning. There's so many things. You can go down the rendering hole. That's a huge area, rendering. Everything from the actual renders happening on the boxes and how the boxes are put together and the way you're doing the rendering, all the way through just how it's showing the pixels on the screen. And there's a lot of interesting things there. So, reading SIGGRAPH papers, talking with people, going to talks, it's just important to keep learning in those areas.
Yeah, and I'd like to add also that for when it's for career advancement, like purpose or goal, don't hesitate to take your time also learning those skills, either like in practice or by doing some training depending on how you prefer to work. But sometimes we get a bit too excited about jumping to the next role, and then until that's a bit too much to take on, and that's fine. It's trying stuff, and sometimes it doesn't work out, but then taking the time to go back and be like, okay, well, maybe I'm from a technical background and I can learn different type of programming language, for example, but I'm not so much of a managerial person, or I haven't been trained in that area, so I'm just gonna work on that and focus on that for the next months, years, until I get a bit more comfortable with organizational skills, for example, and then I can maybe work in a different role. So it all depends on where we are at in our lives, in our career, but it's good also to take our time, I think, and that's something in our industry we always want to go super quickly. But remind ourselves that, okay, actually, maybe I need to take a step back and just, take things easy.
I think that's a great point, that I think that our industry often really encourages speed and change. But there are times when things are a little quieter. So that leads me to the next question, which is, what are some strategies for staying motivated and continuing to grow professionally during periods of industry stagnation? Kristine, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that is such just a relevant question right now at this moment in time. I think we're all feeling it in different ways. And so, one strategy that I have found that's always really worked for me is just to sort of take a break, after, whether it's just a slowdown at work, or maybe a layoff, or whatever may happen, just giving yourself, kind of your body and your mind, time to rest, whether it can be different. It can be a day, it can be 2 weeks, whatever kind of you need. And that downtime sort of allows you to recharge and sort of reflect on your path. Because in my experience, it's always kind of like leading up to like just really, really busy, and then you haven't had time, and so, when you kind of take that moment, your motivation starts to come back. And that's when I start to sort of learn again, right? And trying to expand core areas and new areas. I love audiobooks. I have a busy life. I can't just sit down and read. So, I'm always, it's such a nerdy question, but like, what book are you reading? And I'm always asking. So, business books, technology books, like, and I'm always looking like, okay, are they within the last 4 years, right? Because technology is changing so fast. Some of them are relevant, and some of them we've gone past them. I love self-help books. Just anything to sort of get you motivated. I've started subscribing to a lot of newsletters that are like crawling the internet, because, well, I don't have time to look for all those, and I'm impressed. I don't know how, they basically gather all the media and entertainment news, all the tech news, and I can skim and see what's important and know what's happening in the world of tech to sort of see where it's trending. And the other thing that's really helped me stay motivational is just LinkedIn contacts, email contacts, coffee dates. When you have that conversation with someone and you're like, oh my gosh, this is exciting, and then you start thinking of all these other things and you leave it really jazzed, those are a great way. Talks like this help you stay motivated and educated. And I think listen to music. That's my last non-tech. I think just that can get you excited for what's coming.
Yeah, it's really funny, Kristine, that you're bringing up more personal life into it, because that's definitely my first reaction as well. Like, how to stay motivated is actually to take care of ourselves and stay as much as possible balanced, and find the personal activities and thing that we like and that is making us feel good, just as a person. And if we can do that, and I don't know, go for a jog, or like listen to music, or whatever it can be, then already it's an aspect of the motivation. And I'd like also to organize some small social activities at work. It can just be bringing board games for during the lunchtime, or we've done a few karaoke also during lunchtime. That's kind of the good side of it's a bit less busy, so we less people are getting annoyed by the karaoke, but yeah, just try to have fun as much as possible. It's not always it's easy to say, but not always easy to do, but that definitely makes a difference. And also, all the things we were, when we're at a busy time and we're just like, oh, I wish I could do that. Oh, I wish I could fix that thing, which is so annoying all the time. And well, that's the time to do it. Like, and suddenly there's so much projects that can arise from, oh, well, actually we could change things which are very core to our pipeline, which there's no way we can think of doing that at a busy time because it's just going to be too disruptive. That maybe we can do in a more quiet time. So, and yeah, as you were saying, also like conferences, like I always come back from conferences being like, oh yeah, that's amazing. I want to do this and that, and getting so excited and then getting back into the weeds. So yeah, there's those different aspects I'm trying to foster on my side.
Gonna say you guys both hit on two things that I also love. Like, so one, mentioning like just the staying positive and just having that positive energy. So my kids watch this show called Brainchild, and they talk a lot about like, the whys of things. So I see Kristine laughing, so she might already know what show I'm talking about. But one of the really cool things in the show that what you guys just mentioned reminded me of is there's this thing where if you go into a test and you're happy and you're positive about it, you do better. And so, bringing that positive energy into your daily life will help you actually be more confident and help you, feel like you can achieve something. So I think that note is super important. And I think we often forget, like, especially if you have, when you have your kind of to-do list, you're just trying to like chug through, I want to hurry up, I want to get it finished, right? But sometimes the things that you need to do is to take that break, find that energy, and you actually become more efficient that way, and you can get your tasks done so much faster. So I love that, and I also love Brainchild. If you haven't watched it, it's a great show. And then the second thing actually Leila mentioned too is it's a great time to think about refactoring some of the things that you've done. And even if you're like, this thing works really well, you know what, the second time you build it, it's even better. You think you don't have room for improvement, you always do. And I think people can often feel like, oh, but it took me so long to build it the first time. It's also you learned during that process, you were learning how to do it then. You've already learned how to do it. So the second time around, or the third, or whatever it is, you will get there faster, and you will find newer ways of doing things. And it's always really good to think about refactoring, because technology gets old, and upgrading to newer versions of whatever language you're on can add additional efficiencies that can help you scale and help the organization. Or even if you're not at an organization and that's a tool you've written before somewhere else, hey, this is a good time for you to go ahead and do that. So I think that there's a lot of value in doing things like that.
Awesome. I love your message of positivity. I'm a huge believer in positivity. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. So how do you approach lateral moves when it might not offer a clear path to advancement? Fran, do you have thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I can't say I have as many thoughts on this one, but
I can jump in if you want me to.
Even though it's my question. Well, I'll just say really quick that I feel like, people, when you go to school when you're young, everybody's like, oh, do well in school, take this path, and it's like this direct line. And real life isn't like that. Real life's a lot messier. So just know if you look around and you say, well, I don't see that there's a path for advancement, whatever that means to you, advancement, where I'm at, then look around and see what might you like to do that's going to expand your skills. So what you might think is, well, that's not going to help me very much, but it could, because maybe by taking that, you're going to move more into a leadership position, or you're going to know how that group works more intimately, which will help you for a leadership position. Because a lot of times for leadership, they want you to have good relationships with all the different departments. So when you're that person who's only doing that one thing, you may not know how to talk to the other departments. Maybe they have a different sort of style that they prefer. And so I think it's important to just realize that, sometimes it's 2 steps back to go forward. And it might seem like it's not the forward motion, but actually you're here hitting yourself against the wall. and that's not working, and maybe it can't work because there's industry forces that are against you, and it's better to just turn around. Like, I always think of it like a stream. There's the force of nature that's coming through, and if you're trying to swim against it, you're going nowhere. But if you just turn around and swim with it, oh yeah, you can swim around, go around the corner, and then get to where you're going. Whereas that forward motion that you thought you were going, there's just no way. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Kristine. Maybe I'll think of some more thoughts here.
No worries, no worries. I actually, and this is why we have these type of panels, I have a bit of a different opinion, which is always good, right? And I see the lateral moves as an opportunity for growth that you want, and so, even if it doesn't offer you that maybe immediate advancement, it allows you to broaden your skills, to gain new perspectives. And, one of the key things is building relationships in different areas, whether it's internally or externally, like vendors, clients, just new tech that's coming in. So that kind of experience just makes you way more versatile, and it just can open up so many more doors for you that maybe you also had never considered before. That's just like my favorite thing, is just working with people, and then all of a sudden you're just like, oh my gosh, we could do this. And that goes back to the previous question a little bit, it's also a huge opportunity to showcase your adaptability and leadership potential in, areas that you're not familiar with, or environments you're not comfortable in, which can be just as valuable as promotion. So the lateral moves can also really help you, again, previous question, in your motivation, just by offering you fresh challenges and new perspectives. So I think, I was telling the group this a little bit earlier. I'd been at a couple companies where leadership had been requested to change roles every 2 years. And that was so that they had that diversity of departments and knowledge, because those companies felt that they couldn't lead properly if they didn't have a very wide scope of the whole organization and different types of functions. Like IBM's was one of those, and Comcast was another that did that a lot. So it's cool. I kind of like that, learning new things and that forced transition.
Yeah, General Electric did that for the people who were in the leadership program. They spent 2 years in every division.
Yeah.
And Disney used to have a thing that they called Disney Way 1, where they had 1 week where you went and you spent time in every division and learned about those divisions. But I will say, sometimes when you make these lateral moves, you'll be like, yeah, I have to do this to eat or whatever. You might think it's not going to make any difference, and it might not make a difference that year, but maybe 2-3 years down the line, it will make a difference, because you've moved on, and so have those other people. Or you've moved on, and now all of a sudden somebody's like, oh, go talk to those people, and you're like, oh, I know them. Of course, it's easy. Whereas you never would have imagined that from where you're at today.
Fantastic points. I have a bit of a follow-up question. How do you negotiate salary or different job responsibilities, whether you want to take on more responsibilities or just different ones? And maybe you do have some thoughts, Fran, there.
Yeah, I'm gonna start with the salary, and then I'm gonna pass for Kristine for the negotiating your way up. So sometimes when you go to get a new salary, you just get a new job. And that's a valid way, but you can also work your way up through a company. And I'm going to take you jump for another job, and Kristine's going to take through the same company. Well, first off, from my perspective of salary negotiation, you need to know what you're worth. You need to do the research. A lot of times people in engineering will just do this because we like numbers and we like math and we like to look around and do research on things. Looking at places like salary.com or whatever the latest place is it seems like you could use AI for this, right? And in California, they're required to post the salaries, although the ranges can be quite broad, so it doesn't really tell you too much. But I believe in asking your friends, which I know they tell you not to do, but it's like, of course, as the employer, you don't want people to do that, but as the employee, you should do that, just to kind of level the playing field a little bit. Also, I really recommend this book. negotiating your salary, how to make $1,000 a minute. And I treat negotiations like going to the flea market. Because in America, we have to negotiate for our houses, our cars, and our jobs, but pretty much nowhere else. You go to the store and you just pick up whatever and you pay whatever the price is. But in other cultures, they do a lot more negotiation. And so we don't have a lot of practice for it. So I recommend doing some practice with negotiation. You need to be willing to walk away, which means you might not get the job if you start negotiating really hard. And I have a short story about that. I got offered a job. I met with the manager. He seemed great. People seemed great. The company was great. It was in San Francisco. And I looked at the salary they were offering and I thought, well, they say if you live somewhere, your salary should be, like your rent should be a quarter of what your salary is. So I figured out what that dollar amount was for my sister's apartment in San Francisco. And then I went and I countered with that dollar amount, which I knew was a little bit high. And I figured they'd come down and I could probably figure it out, compromise. And then they just ghosted me. They just never came back. The HR person was responsive, but the manager was just like MIA. So I was like, well, is that a real job offer? They didn't even offer it to me. I was like sad about it, but I was like, okay, whatever. And then I started my new job and 2 other people started the same day that I did. And we were all talking. We'd all gotten offers from that company and they had ghosted us. And then 3 months later, that company didn't exist anymore. So even though they wanted to hire us, they couldn't afford us. And the company we were at, we were all very happy we were at. But, that's a kind of a lateral thing. It's like, I thought, oh, it's going to be one thing. And it's like, no, it's something else. But, I had to be willing to walk away. And that can be very challenging. Usually you think you worked hard to get that job. To walk away from it seems like the wrong thing, but in that case, it definitely was the right thing.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I think, one thing that I always tell myself about negotiating is that have the conversation with yourself. Am I willing to lose this opportunity if I'm negotiating? And I don't want to say that to scare, but and be confident that, yeah, they're not paying me what I'm worth. So I'm going to walk away. I sort of always say, if you're going to negotiate, be willing to walk away. But, the thing too, what Fran said about doing your homework, like that's so crucial about doing it. And I'm such an advocate for having that salary conversation. It doesn't happen at all enough. And I know it's kind of maybe squeamish and awkward and whatever, but like, I don't know, how are you going to know, right? I mean, sometimes you look at like, what's that website, Blind something, it's for like programmers. I can't remember the full name of it, but anyways, it's like, some of these salaries are like out to lunch. They're just so high. So I think it's good to sort of like bring you back and know where you're really at with people in our industry. And I think in terms of getting different responsibilities, I mean, the number one thing you need to do is just talk to your manager first. Like there's so many people that don't actually tell anyone that they want more responsibility or different challenges or, and then they just become unhappy and you're thinking, why did they leave? Because they never spoke up. And I mean, you definitely have the one-on-ones and try and like pull it out of them, but you have to advocate for yourself as well. The worst they can say is no, and the best they can say is yes. So have that conversation, tell them what you want, and really try to find a solution that helps bring both the company and you forward. But at the end of the day, you know what you're looking for, and you might have to walk away. That's but I'm a little bit fault to that. I have this and I'm trying to kick it. It's been a lot of years, but I always think that the grass is always greener. Or I'm worried the grass is not greener on the other side. And so then I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll stay or I'll do this. And it's so, I admire that people are very decisive and change the careers. I think that that's for me a really respectable thing, because I'm always like, oh, it's good. And anyways, so everybody has their own struggles to say, and everybody has different routes to go. But hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah. I will say that it's like just stay or to go is a good question. And when I was younger in the Bay Area, everybody was hopping jobs. Like this, that's what people did, and you did that to learn more. You did that because that company was up and coming until they weren't anymore, and then they went under, and that's something that Sheryl Sandberg, the thing I got out of Lean In when I read that book was, she's like, well, look to see, is your company growing? If it's not growing, then yeah, maybe it's not the best place to be, because there's not going to be as many opportunities for advancement at that company if it's growing. If it's growing, that's when it's got those opportunities, is what I'm trying to say. And to go, to change companies, it is a lot of work. So, that's fine. And if you're going to stay, that's fine too. I have some friends who've been at some companies for 20 years, but they have had a very different experience than what I've had in changing companies. Another thing I'd like to say about changing companies is, if you're changing companies every 2 years, you might want to think about why you're doing that. I think it's important on the technological side that people stay long enough that they made something and then they got to suffer the consequences of their choices that they made. And the reason why I say that is, when you make something, it's really great at the beginning. It's all greenfield and you do this cool thing. It's so much fun. But then you had to make choices along the way, and there's going to be pros and cons to those choices that you made. And it's good when you learn them, because that goes back to what Tram was saying earlier. When you get to iterate and say, oh, I did it this way that time, and it was good for these reasons, but not good for these other reasons. Now I'm going to do it differently this time. You learn more, you learn in a different way. So while it can be fun with the greenfield, it's actually when you see the consequences of your choices and how the artists respond that you really learn.
Awesome. So that was a really fascinating conversation. I want to talk a little bit about leadership opportunities. How can someone look for leadership opportunities? Tram, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I want to touch on something. I think it was Kristine who mentioned it earlier, but as you're looking for those leadership opportunities, you have to advocate for yourself, right? So we touched upon some topics, like number one, networking, talking to the people internally, and finding out, talking to your manager and making sure that they are aware of your desire to move, because if they don't know, they can't advocate for you. And if you're trying to grow or have some leadership opportunities internally, make sure you have an advocate, somebody that can vouch for you too. I think those things are important. And I'll say, those things can be difficult to do. I know that I haven't always been great at doing that myself. And some, especially, when you're working remote, I can definitely see why and how that can be really tricky. But engage where you can, because sometimes it's also just even being there, so that people remember your name, right? And that you're not necessarily forgotten in a conversation. So where you can, try to participate. I mean, I always say, find that right balance of like participating in a genuine, authentic way, and not forcing it. And then, trying to open up conversations. And again, it's like, it's the networking thing, just trying to find ways to chat with people. And sometimes what leadership opportunities mean is, sometimes it does mean that it's time to look elsewhere. For me personally, like, a lot of my growth has been going from, one place to another place, because I end up, even if I end up in the same title or role, I'm doing a similar job in a different way, and I'm still learning. And I take those along the way. So I think it's really important to think of it as many different ways of seeking out that leadership opportunity. And if it is sort of like climbing the ladders, you can definitely do a lot of volunteer work. I know we've already touched on that, and I think the volunteer work can show your passion and your willingness to potentially lead a group. I'll say, some of you who have attended Pipeline Conference in the past, like I've done some work here as well, and I've learned a lot through that experience that has fed into, you know, my own career. So there's lots of different ways to look at it. I don't know, Kristine, I don't know if you want to jump in and add
Yeah.
some stuff.
I think for me, like I've always struggled, I think, to maybe find that mentor. So I know that is sometimes for people a great way, but for me, I've sort of found that I just look for the gaps and the chaos in the company, and I make sure it's not somebody's role to do it, but I just start making, and I think maybe this speaks to my like organizational brain and my technology brain, but I just start organizing it and and then I know that area. And then, it's like certain things I can just become the go-to, and then people start coming to me more, and then I'm making improvements, and people seem to be it's improving the company, and as we go, and that's sort of my go-to of how to look for leadership opportunities within, and sort of like just making it happen, manifesting it, saying what you want, and sort of start acting the part, I think, is a really great way to do it. Sure, you can apply to all the leadership jobs, but sometimes I find if you're not in a current leadership role, it's hard for people to like see you, or they want you to have that already. But then also, like what Tram had said about I joined VES and the academy, and sort of starting, there's opportunities there to be governors and all sorts of things. And so then, just you can get things done that way. So I think, and talk the talk, read the books, put the work in, and it will happen. It really will.
You said something there that reminded me of a funny story that's kind of related, maybe not exactly, but kind of like just chipping away at something and becoming really good at it. Early on in my career, I worked in systems, and I was so proud because I organized all the Lightwave dongles. I found them all, I documented them all, and I knew where they all were, and I knew which ones were missing. It was one of those things where people were just like, "Oh, how did you do it?" I'm like, "Well, one by one." over time, you count.
It shows you're a leader. It shows you're taking initiative. It shows you're curious. It shows you're organized. These are all traits of a leader. Like, that's totally an amazing example of it.
Yeah,
I did that with graphics cards. Like every time people have trouble with their graphics card, and I'm like, how many graphics cards do we have at this company? And it was like 36, and some people only had one. And then they have a problem. I'm like, let's just get rid of that graphics card. Here, take this other one that I know works.
Yeah, and then when you do that, you're like, all right, well, I'm gonna mark this one out of commission. You update a database. Eventually, at some point, you've touched them all. Indeed.
Awesome. So we can move on to our last planned question. So what advice do you have for breaking into the industry during a hiring freeze or slowdown? Leila, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, my first thought is a bit of a downer, I would say, because if there's a hiring freeze and just there's no job openings, then there's nothing you can really do about it. So maybe it's more about thinking about, okay, how can I apply my skills, and how can I grow my skills outside of the industry, or in an industry which is similar enough, or what do I want to work on? What do I want to develop? And so what type of role could work for me for now? And yeah, maybe that's not in the industry, or maybe it's in a different role, that your dream role, than what you really want to do, but in the industry, but at least you get a foot inside the door. So it's still about being open-minded and think outside the box a little, as much as possible. I also find through the different discussion we've had, I found it very difficult to know what it means to be something I've never done myself. Like, I remember myself when I was like 18 and I had to find like what type of university I was going to, and I have no idea. Like, I have no idea what all those jobs mean. Like, what is it on the day-to-day basis? And what is it that we dream of? Like, let's say, okay, I want to be a florist. Oh, I imagine myself just assembling flowers for the entire day, but that's not the job of a florist. I have a lot of things to do which are not about touching flowers, that we just get to know when we get into the job. So I'd like to try to see that when there's a hiring freeze, where there's slowdowns, when there's reductions in the industry, as an opportunity. Okay, what does it mean for me? Like, how can I use that time? How can I use that opportunity to do something else and discover something else and learn a different role, a different skills, a different industry, and maybe I'll come back as soon as the industry comes back up, or maybe I won't because I'll actually found something which would be different and I like. So I don't have too much of an advice, apart of, okay, well, being realistic about it. If there's no job openings, then yes, we can try to find one as much as possible because there's still here and there, but maybe we can think about something else as well.
I think Leila's advice is excellent advice. It's like, I'm giving it 2 thumbs up. I would say follow the money, right? You need money to live, so follow the money and try to find things that you like to do. Also, when you're looking at other industries, you might want to think about, if I went to that industry and then came back to this one, what can I bring back with me? For example, you could go get an industry doing, IT security, that type of thing. That's an always useful skill to have in our industry because there's not enough people who understand about security, witness the Sony hack and things like that. It's always a skill that's appreciated on the software side. If you go and follow the money to AI, there's a lot of hype about AI. There's a lot of money going to AI. That is a skill that you can bring back. Also, right now, maybe somebody might hire you to do AI at the company where they're not going to hire somebody doing some other type of pipeline job. But there's other areas that are out there where those industries still have money. And if you are working in those industries, you'll be learning those skills that you can bring back. Again, as Leila said, if you end up wanting to come back. Another thing to do when there's not a lot of hiring going on is go back to school, get a master's, get a PhD. It's a good time to do that. And because you're learning and you're gaining other skills that, again, when you come back to industry, you'll bring those with you. And I meant to mention this earlier, but it's applicable here too, which is, if you've got the time, maybe you're in a situation where you've got some support, you don't have to rush out and get a job right away, then take some time and get involved with the ASWF and start contributing code. Start, a project on GitHub. A lot of people I see when they apply and they say, oh, I did this stuff on GitHub. As a manager, I go and check their GitHub. And I'll tell you, it's not very impressive when somebody just goes at the end, they're graduating from school and they just put up all their stuff and it only has like 1 month or 1 commit to it. That doesn't tell me your progress. I love to see a person's progress of like how they did their commits. Like they did a commit and maybe that was okay, but then they came back with some improvements for it. Or, if I see that they're really involved in an ASWF open source project, I may have seen the questions that they posted on the lists. I might see that, the type of commits that they made, and I'll say, okay, that person's very thoughtful about what they did, or they worked well with others. I can go ask the people in the various groups that they're in, like, how is it to deal with that person, and hopefully get a good report about them. But it gives me some insight, particularly into coding, which a lot of times, I know in my career, most of my coding was for people, so I can't go around showing that to other companies because it's a competitor. And it also, like any proprietary code that was written at a company, wouldn't apply anywhere else. So to have something that shows how you code is very nice. And so it's an investment that I think of it as that time, the hang time, it's an investment. It's okay to take a little bit of a break, but it's really an investment, in not just in yourself, but when people go to see what have you done, that's the time to fill out your portfolio.
Yeah, and everything you're describing, Fran, is resonating really well with me, because if I share a bit like how I got into the industry, I was actually just I was a developer and an IT consultant on some boring topics, let's say. And I wanted to change, to do something else, work in a different context, because I wasn't really seeing the purpose of what I was doing. So went back to study in computer vision. I didn't really know anything about computer graphics. And then there was that teacher who was super passionate about computer graphics. And so I was like, oh yeah, I really want to do that. And so that's how I ended up doing a PhD in computer graphics, really and the intention for me was to go deeper into the field and understand things and take time also to really explore that field. And then that's how I ended up working in a big studio. And so that's all that, like, going back to the study, maybe doing something else, making connections, just talking to people, and ending up in a different industry, in a different area. And yeah, so far I was lucky, I would say, but yeah, that turned out well for me.
Nice. I actually have one tip to add. So if you are looking for another industry, create a couple resumes. They will literally, if you're applying to legal software, they have no clue what Maya and Houdini is. They doesn't even matter. So pull out anything that's M&E related and keep your soft skills and your transferable skills. Keep Python, C++, Java, all those things. Yes, you manage projects, but do they need to know that like the rendering project was, and just like very specific things, take those all out. They won't look at you if you don't have them. But think of our jobs. We have so much to do. So you can also create flavors of your resume, because everyone's resume could take up 15, 20 pages, right? And
even if you're just starting.
Yeah, you're just picking the highlights. So pick different highlights that are maybe rendering focused, or, whatever job you're trying to target, but that don't apply with your M&E to other industries, or you're kind of wasting your time.
Yeah, I was going to add to that too, that another tip that I found is, if you're looking to kind of enter industry, or maybe switch into another area of this industry, for sure, going out to an adjacent and then coming back is great. But related to the resume note is, maybe there's somebody that you think is like amazing and you want to do what they do. They're like, oh man, they're great. Look at their LinkedIn profile. What have they done? What are some things that actually, when you look at it, that excite you? Because that probably excites other people. And that's a really good way to kind of like center your focus, and especially during the time right now with the hiring freeze and slowdowns, right? So those are good areas to focus on, and rewriting, and just so what Kristine said, to rewrite your resume for different areas and different emphases. And maybe you write a resume that is like, this is my ideal job. I would love to find something that caters towards this. And then there's other resumes that are maybe a slightly different flavor of that, so you can kind of get your foot in certain areas. And I also, one other tip I wanted to add was touching on what Fran said, is a GitHub presence. I've hired on my team for pipeline TDs, and I am surprised at how many people don't have GitHub presences. And for me, that's just like, kind of need that to know what you've done, how you've done it. And especially, for the roles on my team, I'm generally looking for people who have experience doing, pipeline TD work. So I would say this is even true for people who aren't even trying to break into it, but just having that is, for me, super important.
Can I ask a counter question though, Tram, to that? So if you are working in a studio and everything's proprietary, so you cannot put it on GitHub, you have a private GitHub. So are you essentially saying that you have to fill it from your like 5 to 9 at night working on your GitHub, or what's kind of your vibe there?
Well, it's more than most people will tell me, like, they don't have it at all.
Okay,
so yeah, and that's when I'm like, not at all. So what do you use? And a lot of, I get it. Sometimes people are used to using whatever their own IDs that are local. So I also get that. But usually I'll say, well, can you just send me some example of code that you've written? And there are some people where I look at their resume and I know, like, okay, you're like a friend of so-and-so. I know you've done the work. I know you've impacted the industry, but I would love to see it because I'd like to understand just how you problem solve. Because I think that's another thing, right? When you're looking at someone's code, it's not just about, what the end result was. It's also how they got there. And I tend to laugh because anytime I have to write code, I'm always like a little embarrassed. I'm like, I feel like you're in my brain. You're looking at what's in my brain and how I process that. Luckily no one's laughed at me, so it's a good thing.
That's a true thing. You can tell how people think by how they code. I don't like to be judgy about it, but I think it's tough because in at least the software industry, people seem to think you should code all the time, and I don't like doing that after my butt being in the chair for 8 hours. I got to get out and move and do something else and look at some green grass or something, nature. Look at the waves or something. So I feel like people shouldn't necessarily be coding all the time. But that said, if you have an interest in something, like, let's say you have an interest in editorial, then, get involved with the open source for the Open Timeline IO. Get involved with, if you're interested in color, get involved with color. You don't necessarily need to spend like every day, from 5 to 9 working on it, but you could spend a few days a month, or take a month and spend that time. Like if you're between jobs or something, it's an opportunity to give back, but it really does show like what you've done. But it is also a generational divide. Like I know people who are younger, there's a lot of schools that have people, make GitHub accounts and use that as part of the class or as part of your senior project or something. And that was not a thing when I was going to school. And also most of the places I've worked at, like I said, proprietary. And it's unfortunate because I get a little bit mad about the way our industry is, because there's a lot of those companies, they don't exist anymore. They were a startup, or they were, big in their time. They're not there anymore. And I wish I had that code, but it's not like it would run on anybody new's platform. But I sometimes miss it because it's like, oh, I kind of liked what I wrote for those people, and it's doesn't exist anymore.
I'm absolutely a huge believer in open source, so I definitely second that suggestion, and it's a great way to get your code out there for people to see. So I think we should probably move on to some Q&A questions from our audience. So far, the thoughts and experience that you guys have shared has been really fantastic. So I'm excited to to see where we can go with some of these other questions. So first up, we have a question from Alessandro. So Alessandro said that it's funny to see how much of entering the industry seems to be based around relationships, and was wondering whether there are some traditional scholarship pathways, so in coursework that you would encourage people to take, either in formal universities or colleges or online, to help qualify to be a pipeline developer.
Well, what I shared about my career kind of shows that you don't need the network to get into, because I didn't know anyone in the industry, and still I ended up in it. So yes, this is possible. What I'm looking at personally when I'm recruiting for the pipeline jobs is either, because in my mind, there's very few people who know both the industry and the programming. So some people exist like that, but there's very few of them. So most of the time it's more either you know programming, either you know computer graphics, or you've done more of a artistic type of career, or just like studies. So it's depending on what you're more interested into, like how life turns out to be for you, then it could be just about, being very good at Python programming, for example. But even like when I joined, I didn't know Python either. I learned. I was more of a C++ developer. And so that's, and there's some schools which particularly are focusing on development for computer graphics. Like, to be honest, I wouldn't really be able to like name them, all of them, but some are. But yeah, it's more about, okay, if you're very good at programming, then that might just be enough, and show that you also have some interest in creating beautiful images. And that's the key.
Yeah, I think for me, like I don't even look for the connections in the industry. I'm just, the first thing I'll look for me is sort of a computer science degree. And then, back before COVID, when it was actually really, really hard to hire anyone in the industry because it was so booming, I was always looking outside of the industry for people that were just strong programmers. They didn't need to know, any of the APIs, and because they were clever and knew it, they picked it up in a moment, so that's where I've had my success finding people.
I'll add just one point that I've definitely seen when hiring. I've seen some folks come over from other industries or come straight out of school with maybe no computer graphics experience or any experience in the industry. And one way that they've been able to show through formal coursework that they're very interested in it is there are some courses in Udemy or Effects PhD that do specifically point towards the use of programming within the industry. So take a look at that if you're interested in some resources there.
Yeah, Coursera as well.
Yes, Coursera is a great one too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we'll go on to the next question. So we have one from Stephanie. When you talk about volunteering, is it possible to find this kind of opportunity in a remote environment?
It is. So, I mean, TPC, we're remote. We've been since the beginning. I don't like to say we're remote, but we're international. When I started this with Alexis Casas, he was in France and then he moved to London. So, we've had people from all over the world participate. And also LA SIGGRAPH, a lot of their events and things are remote. And also there's SIGGRAPH chapters all over the world. So you can join a local chapter, and how much they're meeting in person versus not just depends on the chapter. VES, same thing. They're also global organizations, so they're all over the world. Some chapters, Women in Animation also is international. So there's definitely different organizations that are ASWF. I don't think it's like their meetings are on Zoom, so you don't need to be there in person. Can anybody think of any other organizations?
I think you hit most of them, or at least the ones
Yeah.
that come up the most often. I don't think the list ends there, but that's definitely a great starting.
Yeah. Also, there's also PyCon, which is the Python conference, but I don't know how much they do events online. Again, I think there's different organizations that some do them online and some do them in person, but you can go in person. Like there's PyLadies as well as the Pythonistas. So there's a whole bunch of different Python groups that meet, and there's also other types of groups like groups on Elastic and back end sort of things, and on AI. So there's a lot of opportunity to network and to volunteer.
Yeah, Bhavik mentioned in the chat 3D Pro mailing list as another place where you can gather with other professionals in the industry and discuss a wide range of topics. So it's a good one to mention.
But that is a private list, so you have to
join
invited. Yeah.
Yeah. So next up is a question from Tatiana. Can you walk away or negotiate in the current VFX market? It looks like you can only get a job if you agree on everything the company offers and if you are physically in London, Vancouver, or Melbourne.
I mean, I think you have to sort of feel the temperature of the water, right? Like when you're coming in, do you feel like there's room for negotiation? I feel like there's a little bit, but they also, generally jobs right now have set bands. So there is a bit of wiggle room. And I think sometimes on other benefits, like a vacation or other things, then that's where some companies are willing to sort of, be flexible on. It's tough. Sometimes you have to, right now, you have to take what you're given, but you feel that vibe when you're kind of talking to your HR recruiter.
I would add one thing I used to do when I was freelancing was I would just tell people, like, I would tell people like, hey, if you want to book me, here's my introductory rate. If you, and you can take that for next 3 months or 6 months or whatever the time frame is. When you renew it, it'll be my regular rate. So you could also say, like, if you feel like the offer is low and it's a freelance rate, you could say, well, I'm willing to take it so you can try me out. And if you want to renew, I'm asking my standing rate, which is whatever it is. That's also another way, and potentially finding creative ways of negotiating for that. And obviously it's a little bit easier to negotiate when you already have an existing role, but I know right now that's not exactly the easiest thing. So if you do have something, it's probably the best time to make that leverage. Otherwise, it's like test out the water, see how open they are to that negotiation.
Yeah, I see Christopher posted about know what you're worth and don't take a job at half the salary you would normally get. This is the same thing with anything that's negotiable, right? So it's like right now there's just not a lot of jobs, so they may offer you half, and that might end up being the going rate. If you end up taking something at half, just know that you're going to have to correct that later, and that might mean that you have to switch jobs or move to another country or whatever, move somewhere else. It's unfortunate, but I mean, that's the environment that we're in.
And I would also add to that you should check to see what your laws are wherever you live, because in certain places you don't have to disclose what your past salary was.
Yeah, generally I'd say never disclose what your past salary was. I got in a fight with an HR person about that once. She's like, then I wouldn't hire you. I said, well, if the manager wants me, you're going to have to hire me. You know, it's like people don't need to know how much I made in the last job. It's not relevant at all because I'm bringing my skills to do something for a new company. So it should be based on that relationship, not based on, you know, however much. Maybe I decided to work for free for that person because they were my dad, right? It's like I don't need to go into those details. They don't need to know. By the way, actually, my dad he doesn't work in this industry, so that's not a thing. But you know, that person doesn't know.
But I always tell them because you don't want to come off as combative like at the beginning. That's so for me, I'm always like I always have to tell them because I feel like if I give them the runaround, sometimes I'm like, well, what are you offering? Or like kind of push it back on them. But I don't know. I want to have a good vibe with the recruiter. So that's the challenge, I think, Fran, is like, right, it's a balance of whether
I just tell them that I made a salary I was happy with, or that I made industry standard. You know, if I knew that I was a little bit high, I might say, yeah, I know I'm on the higher end because I'm worth it. But you can just say that to them. Chris, don't say that if you know you're not worth it, I guess.
Awesome. So the next question is from Ollie. So one piece of advice I get pretty consistently is to find and then reach out to the hiring manager and connections I have at the company after I apply to a position. As people who probably receive these messages often, what are you looking for when you receive them, and how can job seekers structure them in a way that makes a good impression and is respectful of your time?
I have some opinions on that. I would say, you know, what I would suggest is if you're going to reach out to some of the hiring managers and you have some people in your network in common, how the people in your network in common reach out on your behalf. Even if it's just to say, hey, I've got a friend that's really interested in a job you're hiring. Do you mind if I just have them message you? Because the majority of the time we're going to say, yeah, sure. But once you have like kind of crossed that connection, it just makes it so much easier. Because I feel like, you know, I'll often get you know, reached out to by people I don't know, and they might be in my network, but we get inundated with sometimes those messages, and that's really hard to kind of, you know, weed it out. And just because you're connected to a bunch of folks together doesn't necessarily mean that they've worked together. So it's also nice to even get a like, you know, hey, maybe you know, Fran's friend is looking for a role and I have a role. And she could even say, oh yeah, you know, so and I worked together back at Disney, you know, would you mind if I have them reach out to you? And like it just needs to be a quick line. And I think that that's huge and impactful in my book.
Excellent. We'll move to the next question. I know we're running out of time, so I want to see how many we can get through. So the next one is from Olaf. I am curious about the impact of remote workers compared to hybrid in-office colleagues regarding careers.
I don't think it makes so much of an impact in the sense that there are people who are working remotely, but they are very connected to a lot of people in the company. They always message a different person on various topics, and so they are still aware of what's happening, what are the latest news, and like they're very visible even if they're remote. And other people would come into the office, but it's not in their nature to like just talk to everyone in the kitchen, for example. So it could make a difference, but at the same time, not everyone is in the studio either. So being remote has a lot less impact, and it's more about how do you interact with people, like how much do you interact with them, and how much of a difference it makes to them, that, you know, how do you help those persons, like how do you answer their question or be there for them, which is gonna get you visibility. And, you know, we talked about taking initiatives, filling the gaps. So that's something we can still do remotely, and just take time to continue to talk with your colleagues, with other people in the company. That's, I think, what makes a difference.
Excellent. So next question is from Felipe. How can someone in a production role encourage and support professionals who are interested in becoming a TD while also empowering them to help solve production-related pipeline issues?
I'm a little unclear about the question. When it's production, is it saying someone in a production role? Is that like production producer, or just somebody who's working in, a film production or TV production?
Yeah, my guess would be on the more artistic side of our VFX and animation companies.
So
I mean,
it's
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay.
This gets all right. I'll go. I'm going to roll maybe both of these into the question after in, which is, if you're coming from the production or from the artistic side, I think it's good to do some small projects to show what you can do, and also if you're learning, like you could take a class in Coursera, take one of the classes Rachel mentioned earlier, take some programming classes, and try to do something small. Particularly if you're working with the producers, it's good to shadow one. That's a little challenging when we're remote to shadow somebody, but make arrangements to spend the day with that person in a chat room, or just like leave your Zoom window open, maybe turn off the graphics or have them share their screen while they're talking so you can see how they work, and then look for opportunities to see how you can make things better. From the producer side, if you're producer, you can look for those small opportunities, like, oh, if I had this and it was easier to do my job, maybe that person can help you with it. If there's something happening, you can take a look at if you're looking at the artist and how they're working in production, you can say, what are sticking points in production? Is there some little grease that could be added to make things easier? And then, say to that person, hey, by the way, it's like these people have to do this thing 500 times. If they had a button that, said, select all these things and then just do it, just apply it. That's really easy for somebody to code up. Doesn't take a lot of time. It's really easy to test. So they're probably not going to mess anything up too much. And so you can encourage somebody to do that. I wouldn't try to shove anything down people's throats, because that can be, distasteful for the person you're trying to encourage. But, to just offer them the opportunity, like, hey, I noticed that, every time we have a project on this and it goes through this department, it's really slow because they have to do all this boring work. And if they had somebody to help them, they would be able to get that work done much more quickly. And since we've got, 10 more commercials that are exactly the same, or 10 more shots that are exactly the same, it'll really make a difference.
Awesome. Well, with that, I think we are mostly out of time, and we've gone through all of the questions at least a little bit. So thank you to all of our panelists and the Pipeline Conference for hosting this event. And I'm going to pass it back to Jason.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you once again to Rachel for moderating, and to our panelists, Leila, Tram, Kristine, and Fran for participating with us today. One round of virtual applause. Okay, that's my real applause here. Anyway, and thank you to all of you for joining us today and for your questions. And it's been a great event. And once again, we'll post the recording of this session on our YouTube channel, the Pipeline Conference, again, where all of our past events are. And we look forward to seeing you at our events in November. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.